Well, everyone's connecting to audio and video. I'll go ahead and introduce the topic for today and what we're trying to do. I'm Trey Rudolph. I'm one of the leaders of the Eastside Change Coalition. Excuse my voice. I was at an event this morning yelling my head off. So my voice is a little raspy. But the point of today is really to share an educational experience with you all that lays outside what is generally taught in a Eurocentric curriculum. Um, of course, most of our education comes from school, and school only feeds us one type of narrative. So we're trying to break that system and share with you a lesson that revolves around the BIPOC diaspora. And to lead that educational session today, we have Jabali Stewart. He is a father of three, circle keeper, a musician, a martial artist, an Afro-punk, uh, and an excited spirit. And he's going to share with you some history about the African origins of punk rock music, something he's super passionate about. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Jabali.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Trey.
One thing actually before that, since we do have a small group, I will ask if you guys can turn on your video, excuse me, if that's possible, just so we can share this experience. Um, Learning is not an individual experience. So if you're open to that, please do so.
I love that. Thank you, Trey.
Yep.
It's really good to see all y'all here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you for allowing me to share something with you that is just near and dear to my heart. I'm an ethnomusicologist by training, but actually, you'll figure that out soon enough. Um, when I ask, I'm going to plow through a lot of information. A lot of this is on YouTube, a lot of videos. It's going to be kind of abrupt, as a musician, sound is a thing. So I'm going to be going in and cutting out of videos. So it's sometimes going to be an abrupt shift, and I apologize ahead of time. And I also want to just say that by the time I finish this presentation, it will need to be updated because there's always new information that's emerging about the diaspora, um, its foothold in this region, meaning the New World, um, and its manifestation. I mean, we're uncovering new things all the time. So, with that, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a long voyage. Before I get started, though, are there any questions, concerns, apprehensions,
Um,
anything in it?
I have a quick question. Where will we be able? I see that you're like recording this. Is there somewhere we can find the recording of this meeting after the meeting?
I'm curious too because I want a copy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Oh, God.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you're following us on Instagram at the Eastside CC, we post all the links to any Zoom calls that we record in the link tree in our bio.
Sweet.
Hopefully, y'all have access to that. You should have access to it even if you don't have an Instagram. If you just Google it, and yeah, you can find it there.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. And my last little thing is like what you're doing here, this is revolutionary and you need to do more of this. The more you do things like this and take your education into your own hands, the better off you'll be in the long run. I swear to you.
Yep.
All right. That said, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to launch into this. Do-do-do. Mm-hmm. All right. So, Elegua feeds my brains, and I say that in all seriousness. And who Elegua is will become very clear, hopefully, shortly. To know the foundations of the story, you kind of got to know a little bit about me. This story for me begins in Columbus, Ohio, which, while this picture may make it look something quite cosmopolitan, it is a rough and tumble of a city. I spent my years in high school there, where I was the Fresh Prince of Worthington. and I loved rabbits. I had a gray rabbit and a black and white rabbit, and this was sort of the identity I presented um, at the homestead, right? And then I'd go to school, and I became the biggest punk rocker on the face of the planet. And it always kind of confounded my parents. Things changed over time. The reality is, whoa, it just happened. I hate when Prezi does that. There we go. Me and my rabbit growl. So by the time I left high school, I started singing in bands. I graduated early. I was 17 when I left the house. Went to college, started singing in bands, moved back to Columbus, and started singing for this band, Bumbleflea. We toured quite a bit, and it was an education of a lifetime, something I'll never take for granted. Was in this band after band after band, went from being a lead singer to here being the mean mugging bass player. We went on tour a bunch. This was one of our tours. This is my brother Christian. Um, Christian and I are still in good contact. He actually lives in Portland down the street. We were on tour and we stopped by a friend of his in Arkansas who had a little baby. Very cute. I had a lot more hair back then, and I lost my hair along the way, as you can see, and Christian's hair color changed. But the point of the matter is we were devoted, dedicated, and we worked our asses off. The whole idea of punk rock, DIY, that was it. We did everything and anything we could to sustain ourselves musically. Pretty hard, especially given that the music isn't always something people want to get to. But if you understand punk rock, you understand that it's more of it's a spiritual, personal experience when you're there in person versus listening to it on a recording of some sort. So those were my foundations. And then I moved from, after I graduated from, it took me a couple of years to graduate from undergrad. I'll just tell you, I graduated from high school in 1987. I graduated from undergrad in 1997. And the reason for that is because I dropped out in order to go on tour over and over and over again. I started off as a pre-vet, and then I ended up a math major. I studied math for 3 years. I almost graduated, and then I dropped out and went on tour again. And then I entered and I became a religious studies major. And I took that training and I moved across the country and I met this man, John Chakai, the late great John Chakai, who's a saxophonist, jazz musician, and he taught me one of the greatest things ever, right? As a punk rocker, it's all about do you, the power of the individual and creative spirit and whatnot. John is a horn player, no longer with us. He's definitely with us in spirit. This man has played with John Coltrane. That's the level of musicianship that you're talking about. When I studied with him, I studied with him for 3 years. And one of the things that he taught me was, I pick up a saxophone and now I feel like I got to actually emulate him or emulate Coltrane or Charlie Parker or all these famous musicians. And the biggest lesson John Chakai taught me was, no, you're a punk rocker. How come you're not playing your horn like a punk rocker? And why aren't you just being true to yourself? And I never looked back. Thanks to my time with him and my undergraduate in religious studies, I ended up moving on to, man, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? From here, I moved up here to Seattle to come to grad school. That was 2001. I got here 2 weeks before September 11th, which was a trip. I entered into the ethnomusicology department, and ethnomusicology for me was a way to merge my love and my real lived experience of being a musician with my religious studies background. I actually thought that I was going to study Orisha music of Trinidad, but that turned out not to be the case. Along the way, I got married, met this woman from Peru. Never ever thought I'd have any connections or ties to Peru. She kind of stole my heart. And then I also managed to get my doctorate. My dissertation was about capoeira, Trinidadian kalinda, and punk rock mosh pits, where I devised a definition of what I like to call combat dance. And it's a way for us to use violence in a ritualized way to offset negative violence that affects us. My wife, Monica, also got her doctorate, cultural anthropologist. She's a brain power in her own right. But the reality of this is that I come from a family of doctors. And so this is really, when I say it took 10 years to get my undergraduate, you can imagine what I was doing to my parents, right? You're, you're going to go do what? You're going to be on the road living out of a van with who? No, the idea was that you'd be a doctor. I was a doctor, but I was a doctor coming into the program with something under my belt versus it being in the abstract. And that actually really paid off. Had a son. He's 20 some years old now. Good looking boy. And then he was from an earlier relationship. My wife and I, we had these two little rugrats who are no longer small little rugrats. They actually, all of us together, look like this. And this was us. My parents had their 50th anniversary 2 years ago. This was us all together. And you notice, you see a mohawk and dreadlocks and all sorts of goodness. This stuff runs deep in us. But I got to take you back to source. In the United States of America, let me back up real quick. So this picture here is a convergence of worlds. My mother, the gray hair, she's from Fresno, California. My father, the balder than, no, I guess he's not. I'm balder than he is. My father is from Trinidad. He immigrated to this country. So we've got multiple source codes that have gone into creating me. The idea of blackness is kind of an interesting thing, right? It's two different worlds. Blackness in Trinidad is not blackness in the United States of America. Negotiating that was always a really interesting thing. And actually, part of the reason why I was able to invest and find myself in punk rock was because I consider and am a margin walker. I walk between the worlds of Trinidad and the Black America. And punk rock was perfect for that. Again, got to go back to source codes though. So we're really looking at the origins here of the code coming out of what we'll call, and I don't like the term and it's not really appreciated, the idea of Bantu. That's why it's in quotes there. This is an academic term that was created by I forget what the origin, but it's a European scholar where Bantu language became this catch-all. But you can really kind of see here, I don't know if this is in your way, right? Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, Gabon, Republic of Congo. There's a source code that's coming from there because this was one of the areas of the Atlantic slave trade where a lot of slaves were enslaved individuals were stolen. The other place that is of importance, oh my God, I swear, you know what, Zoom, and the other one to pay attention to is that the Bantu cosmology, and Bantu, again, think about it, there's like 400 different ethnic groups, if not more, represented by this term Bantu. This image here, this cosmogram, is literally the spiritual foundation for those individuals. And it's this travel from midnight back to midnight. And you can really look at it as stages of life. Midnight is the afterlife. This is where the soup, the kind of cosmic soup is. We move into birth, which is sort of exactly what it says. Birth is kind of this adolescent stage. Things are starting to emerge. And then we move up into noon, and that's where you're at your peak, where you're really starting to make an effort to change the world and become a master of something yourself. And from there, we move into death and becoming an ancestor and an elder. And this cycle is continual. And this cycle actually finds itself here in the United States of America. And there is a very specific something that we'll come back to that comes out of this cosmology. But we move up a little further north and we get to the Yoruba, the Ogun. So we're talking Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Togo, that sort of, there's the Gold Coast, if you will, which was also a place where humans were stolen. And actually, if you kind of keep going up along the coast, you find the third area. There are like 3 major areas along the coast where folks were stolen. The cosmology for especially the Yoruba, which is shared by, again, the Ewe, the Fon, and Kabaye, The cosmology, which some of you may know, it revolves around the Orishas. And the Orishas are deities. You think of a pantheon, sort of like how people learn about Greek pantheon, right? There's an African pantheon. It's older than the Greek pantheon. And there are hundreds of Orishas, you know. The deities of the Orishas are everywhere. It's a way in which lessons are learned, understanding who you are, understanding your relationship to the natural world. And this individual in particular, Elegua, is the one I want you to really hold on to, because Elegua, with an Orisha with whom I have a very strong relationship, he's pretty powerful. Elegua, you don't talk to any other Orisha until you've talked to Elegua. Elegua is the individual, the deity who is sort of that balance between the mortal world and the spiritual world. And Elegua is going to come in really, really seriously moving forward into the new world. When it comes to worship, when it comes to the practice of religiosity in most African cultures, it is a combinatorial thing, meaning it's going to be music, it's going to be dance, it's going to be song, and oftentimes there's this ancestor and or sort of Orisha possession. We'll just use the music is what's holding the dance. The music can sound something different, and now it's going to be a different relation. This is not a small or unknown thing. This practice is ages old. This practice, along with the Bantu Kikongo cosmology, gets moved into the quote-unquote New World through the Atlantic slave trade. And it manifests itself in multiple ways depending on where it lands. So we're going to walk through where it lands, and then I want to connect it to the popular music of that area so that you see how this source code coming out of this, you can see this whole area, right? This source code, this religious source code, is actually informing the popular music of a space. You've got to understand the number of people who were brought over the waters. And this number is small. Like I said, by the time I finish this, there's going to be a revision to this. I'm going to show you a video here. If you haven't seen this video, I watch this video all the time.
Hey, Jabali,
Yeah.
The last video you played was really loud. We couldn't hear what you were saying over the video.
Okay.
So
Perfect. Thank you.
you just make sure that either just turn down the volume on the video or...
Definitely. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm not going to be talking on this one because I just want you, and this is probably one of the only videos you're going to watch from start to finish because it's crucial. Period. The dots represent boats. just wrap your head around that for a second, right? Whenever I see that, actually, one of the things that I always have to come to terms with is that my ancestors were on one of those dots, which is the only reason why I'm here in this particular geographic region. One of the first stops, Hispaniola. And it's right now we know it as on one side Haiti and the other side Dominican Republic. Oh my God. You know what, Prezi? I'm not liking you right now. Something to always remember when we get to these narratives is that the same thing that happened here happened in all of these spots. The Taino indigenous folk were already there in that geographical region. And just a few little important dates. You know, 1492 wasn't a very good year for lots of people. When you really consider that by 1519, only a third of the Taino were still alive, you really recognize that there was a mission of extermination. And then, of course, you bring in the the enslaved Africans, and the picture begins to really emerge. Coming along through with the indentured is this individual, Legua. And in that general region, so Haiti and Dominican Republic, Legua is going to kind of get transferred into what's known as Papa Legba. And this is a really interesting thing, right? It's that because there's a pantheon of gods and goddesses that make up the Orisha, and in the Catholic Church, there is a pantheon of saints and whatnot. The way in which the enslaved Africans could continue to practice their deep spiritual practice was by using a Catholic icon or saint to represent a particular Orisha. So this is way Papa Legba starts becoming called Saint Peter, Saint Lazarus, and many other things in order for the practice worship to continue. And that process is called syncretization. And this is where we start to see syncretization taking place inside the New World, and see the emergence of what gets known as Vodun. Because all of the Orishas are still here. All the Orishas are brought over on one of those dots, two of those dots, all of those dots, right? Because remember where they're coming from. Now the music that is associated with it actually starts to work its way into popular music, both in Haiti and Dominican Republic. And then the Dominican Republic, might be loud again, I apologize. One of the oldest forms, and where you see the presence of the musical source code of the Orishas, is in merengue, which looks and sounds a little bit like this. How we can really make the connection, our connection to Orishas in this one, this drum, big time, especially some of the rhythms that get played on that drum. All right, I'm gonna, like I said, I gotta keep you moving. And in Haiti, we see merengue. It's very similar in terms of source code. The outcome can be slightly different. One way you can tell difference, I'll let you see. So one of the biggest differences that you can see between those two videos is the number of drums. In an Orisha ceremony, many drums is often the norm. Depending on the nature of the colonial practice at play, the number of drums is almost, it's comparable, right? So for instance, here in Haiti, there was such a strong black power mode of resistance and all the rest, so there's a lot of drums. Dominican Republic and blackness is a pretty tough relationship. The United States of America, and blackness, tough relationship. The drum has a tense relationship. That's one of those measures that you can really look at as you move through the diaspora. We're going to keep moving. Our second stop, we're in Brazil. Brazil is one of the most brutal histories when it comes to slavery. You remember it had the most indentured and enslaved people brought to its land. And you know what? 5 million people is that's not a small number. Being the last colony to abolish slavery is not a small reality. And what that did and what the effects that surely are still present cannot be underestimated. The same as with the others, there's an indigenous group there, including the Tupi-Guarani, and it just so happens that my son's name, J-A-C-Y, JC, is a Tupi-Guarani name. We didn't plan that. It just sort of happened. Remembering that synchronization is in place and synchronization is going to happen, especially since there's a Catholic undergirding, right? The Portuguese Catholic in nature. And so in Brazil, it's pretty fascinating because you can have this huge, massive symbolic representation of Christ that's there. But because of the numbers of enslaved Africans, their cultural power and presence could not be underestimated. And it worked its way into popular culture in Brazil in a way that it did in other places, but to a much larger degree. So much so that in Brazil, you're going to see things like this, where you've got Orisha statues actually in public park areas, right? And so in Brazil, the religious system that begins to house the Orishas is called Candomblé, and Ilegua becomes Eshu. I should have mentioned that in Haiti, the Orisha system becomes Vodun. And just to be very clear, all of the representations of Vodun or Candomblé and Santeria that you see on the TV and movies, it's all garbage. And sometimes I think, you know, if Christianity was subject to the same revisionist presentation, it would be pretty interesting. You know, there's a way in which Christianity could become the source code for zombie movies if what was done to Vodun was done to Christianity. Popular music, and of course Orisha music had to happen, but remember, Brazil was pretty tough about owning or popularizing blackness. There's in the martial arts world, there's to this day this huge tension between the source code for capoeira. There are enough folks in Brazil who don't want to believe that capoeira has African origins, which is just hilarious, but it does. So it is a very tense relationship, even though it's very, very present and powerful. And this man, Gilberto Gil, was probably one of the main individuals to help bring the Orisha music into popular music. Give you Tamborim!
Papai, hoje eu vou depressa por aí. Vou fazer minha folia com os filhos de Gandhi. Que a nossa turma é alinhada. Sai no meu bloco pra fazer a patuscada.
Yes, not only a beautiful, beautiful human being, musical genius. Moving on. Stop number 3. We're in Cuba. Same, I mean, yeah, at this point, you're kind of going to pick up the picture, right? The Taino and the Arawak are present in Cuba, 1492. Like I said, not a good year for a lot of people. And then we really have to pay attention to the fact that abolition, they're 2 years shy of Brazil, 1886. So they also have a pretty deep relationship to this idea of slavery, and the population of the enslaved was pretty high for the size of Cuba. That's the thing to pay attention to. I mean, 1 million for an island that's really not that big, that's a lot. And so because of that, the source code of the enslaved managed to work its way into the popular fabric of Cuban culture. In Cuba, the Orishas and Legua is one of those Orishas, was merged into what the syncretization process, and Santeria is the outcome. Santeria houses are all over the place, and I'm sure you've probably heard similar things about Santeria as you hear about Vodun. But Santeria, just like Vodun, is a bona fide religious practice. It has more acceptance. I mean, it has more acceptance in Cuba than it does in other countries, for sure. And it's really, really the source code for so much music in Cuba in a way that it didn't quite happen in other places. There isn't a single, I've been trying to think of a single musical structure that came out of Cuba, that wasn't imported into Cuba, you know, something that was developed in Cuba that doesn't have some touch of, you know, Afro-diasporic hands. But the one, rumba, powerful. And if you kind of imagine, I don't know if you even know I Love Lucy or whatever, but you think about how Americans were portraying rumba, and the reality of what rumba is, you're talking about an African-based musical practice and dance. And you just need to watch this. This video, I love. It's at the beginning. Oh, no, I'm going to start. That little dude is a master. That's rumba. Cuban son can be traced back to the same source code. And then, of course, salsa is going to come back to the same source code. Like the connection to the roots of African spiritual music cannot be ignored. And for me, stop number 4, Trinidad and Tobago. Look, guess who, right? The story remains the same. Not 1492, they had a little bit of a breather, but not by much. One of the big differences that we see in Trinidad and Tobago is the way the colonies or the colonizers fought over the land in a way that didn't happen in other places. So in Trinidad, you're going to see the Spanish, who were the original colonists, bring in the first enslaved, but then, like I said right here, the Dutch, the French, the British, and the British are the ones who really kind of firm up their power there and gain control. And the British don't have a pantheon of saints in the same way that the Catholic, because we're coming out of a Protestant religious tradition. And so syncretization looks completely different in Trinidad as opposed to Brazil, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic. It just looks completely different. The English were just the way they were here, very, very, very effective at stamping out as much as they could of African-influenced art forms. So much so that something like the skin drum, it was banned on the island. There was no skin drum to be played, which actually was something that happened here. That didn't happen in Brazil. That didn't happen in Cuba. That didn't, right? The drum was still an available resource to be recreated by the enslaved in those areas. So in Trinidad, different things had to emerge. The religious practice went way underground into the bush, but it didn't disappear. It's still present and alive today. In Trinidad, we call it Orisha work. Sometimes it also gets called Shango. and it's alive and well. It didn't gain legitimacy on the island until I want to say 2006, where it became an officially recognized religion, because the British Cultural Code remains the main source code, unfortunately. But the influence on Trinidadian music is absolutely tremendous. Remember I told you that my dissertation was about combat dance, and so Kalinda, which is one of the martial arts that I practice, Kalinda is where we find a lot of the Orisha music preserved, because the Orisha drummers oftentimes were drummers for Kalinda, and so that was a way, because they could sort of mask or guise. You know, we're not doing a religious ceremony, even though it kind of is, but it's this martial art. And to be real straight and honest with you, that source code, I haven't let go of it, but that source code from the Bantu folk, that's at play here in Kalinda as well. And it's got its own drum language and everything else. In Kalinda, let's see if I can give you a quick little snapshot of what it Yeah, Kalinda is powerful. The thing that people who don't understand the art form might overlook, they think, you know, these guys are hitting each other in the head with sticks. Men and women play, actually. And part of the idea is to cut the other person and to draw blood from the head. But the real winner is the person who dances the most beautifully, who plays the most beautifully. There's an aesthetic quality. You can't just go into the Gayal, the Kalinda ring, and start acting like a bully. It's just not the way it works. And you see how many people are there. Kalinda is huge, absolutely huge. Kalinda, you heard song, you can't have Kalinda without music. And in that way, the singer is called a Shantwell, and out of Kalinda, the singers started singing and doing musical performances, which became Calypso. The source code for Calypso is really the Kalinda songs of old. And Miss Ella Abdel, she's one of the treasures. Miss Ella Andel is also one of the greatest Orisha singers on the island. And then to sort of wrap up the power of the drumming and the drummers, and the idea of utilization of iron. Ogun is an Orisha of iron, metal, and whatnot. And so the steel pan. So this is where a lot of the drummers from Orisha found their original place, outside of the Gayal. They would move, and they were some of the original steel pan artists. And to just make it very clear, the steel pan is from Trinidad, not Jamaica. In Jamaica, we've got Kumina. Very similar thing. What is the dance? Drums and drums. Move quickly here. So remember that number of drums thing? The English were the ones who controlled Jamaica to a very high degree. Same thing that happened in Trinidad happened in Jamaica. The Maroons of Jamaica were the individuals who really kept hold of that spiritual musical practice and embedded it in Kumina. And then individuals like Count Ossie went on to bring it into popular music. And they did so to such high effect that we ended up with things like this. And if you don't know who that is, you can talk to me afterwards. Finally, Elegua does come to the United States of America. I don't need to tell you there are indigenous folks here. You already know that, right? We're on indigenous land. 1619, first enslaved brought. Roughly 400,000. We know that that number is bigger. Again, every time I do this, there's something new. Louisiana was kind of an interesting place because you got the French and the Spanish cultures pretty strong there in a way that not necessarily they are in other areas. And so in Louisiana, we actually see a place that similar to in Haiti and the rest where synchronization could take place, the rise of voodoo could occur. There's even a place called Congo Square. Congo Square is referring right back to the African origins. An individual you need to know who is really, really renowned in the blues world, Robert Johnson. Crossroad Blues.
I went to the crossroads, fell down on my knees.
I'm going to move from Robert pretty quickly. I want you just to know something, though. Robert Johnson's talking about the crossroads. Fell down on his knees. Remember, who is the Orisha of the crossroads? That's Elegua. Robert Johnson's talking about Elegua. In many, 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 many spiritual houses, and it happened over here as much as it happened in other places, Elegua gets known and put on as the trickster. In areas where there isn't a lot of Catholic saints and whatnot to do the synchronization process, who's the trickster? And that's the devil. And so sometimes Elegua would get masked onto the devil. So there's this big mythology about Robert Johnson going to the crossroads and selling his soul to the devil. And that's how he became the baddest blues musician of his time. Robert Johnson wasn't talking to the devil. Robert Johnson was talking to Elegua. And let's just be very clear about that. And that's actually the African spiritual music practice and cosmology manifesting itself in the blues in the United States of America. That got picked up. And you know what? How many times do we hear about the bluesmen and whatnot?
I said it rained, children. Rain on glass. Didn't it? Yes, didn't it? You know it did or didn't it? Oh my Lord, how it rained.
You just need to know who Sister Rosetta Thorpe is, because as a blues and early rock musician, she was a pioneer of the highest order. This individual is where Muddy Waters, we're going to see emergence.
I'm going down and lose down to get me a mojo. I'm going down and lose down to get me a mojo. I'm gonna have all you women direction of my command. Got my mojo and got my...
And I'm going to stop it right there. Muddy Waters saying, I got my mojo working. M-O-J-O. Mojo, everybody can kind of intuit what he's talking about, right? Like, I got my mojo working on you, baby, but it just ain't working on you, right? I got my mojo working. I got my vibe, my spirit, my essence, my swag. You call it what you want. You know, you pretty much get the point. But mojo comes from, remember that, the cosmogram? A big part of that cosmology is something called moyo, M-O-Y-O. Moyo is animating power force. It's like, it's the spirit force. So moyo morphs into mojo when it gets over here, but that's how we can see the presence of this Bantu cosmology at play in popular music. And of course, 2 seconds of Chuck, because Chuck is a
Just started back doing the things you used to do. As I was motivating over the hill, I saw Maybelline in a coupe de ville. Cadillac rolling on over the road, nothing but a run by V8
right? Chuck Berry. By now, this rock and roll is fully in swing. Rock and roll is rock and roll, and it's moving, and the source is obvious. The source is so obvious. The crowds, like the crowd in that movie, the show, and the crowd in the Sister Rosetta Tharpe, kind of hilarious when you see who's really, that's a whole nother lecture, though. But when you think about it, we get over here to England, and you see that something like this, from the first minute we heard the great guitar intro of Swixie, we became fans of the great Chuck Berry. Like, all of these bands based their entire careers off the work of Chuck Berry, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Robert Johnson. That's all of them, every single one of them, no questions asked, right? And then we know what that trajectory turned into. But because we've got this history in the United States of America of appropriation and separation, unfortunately, folks like Jimi Hendrix, right? God, Jimmy. That song's called Voodoo Child. He doesn't really get any more clear than that of where he's drawn source from, right? I mean, it's all right there for you to see. And if you really understand where it's coming from, you know what Jimmy and all the rest are tapping into. And to be just real blunt and honest, it's what the bands out of England couldn't tap into. They didn't have that, which is for me why Hendrix music has always stood 1,000 notch level higher. It's just coming from a different place. Jimmy and others, all of that leads me to the band that when I was 16, 15 years old, I came across this album, Eye Against Eye. I could listen to the Bad Brains forever and a day. They're still playing around. The Bad Brains were the band that for me did it. Like that I heard their album, it was life's blood. Rastafarians, so that connects to Bob Marley, which is connected to Kumina, playing rock, which is connected to Jimmy, which is connected to Muddy Waters, which is all going back to both the Yoruba and the Bantu cosmologies, all wrapped up in one band. And every time I hear something that's like, why are you listening to that music? That's white music. No, it's not. It's not at all. And why are you listening to that music? I mean, when like I told you, I graduated in the 80s, you know, and folks were listening to stuff that was kind of like, ooh, baby, baby. And I was pissed off because I was a black kid in the United States of America. So why the hell wouldn't I be a punk rock? Because, you know, where else am I going to put my rage? This to me, and it's culturally relevant. One of the bands that doesn't get credit because they were in Detroit at the time of Motown and all the rest, and they were really poised to make this was a miss. We missed this opportunity. We missed this opportunity to have blackness and rock be wedded together, because Motown and other record companies could have put out Death. Death came out, I think, in 1976. Bad Brains, 1977, 78, 79. Death was out in 76, but nobody would pick them up. One, because their name their name was Death, and by then white folks were really moving in on rock, and it was just a rough time. So Death never got they're doing it now, but their real heyday, they missed it. So funny because there's a song by a band called Fear out of New York, I believe. It's a 1980s hardcore band, and it starts off just like that, and you're like, oh, y'all are listening to death, but you just pretended like you did. Bring it up. So death, you could say, oh, okay, those were the old dudes and they were doing the stuff back then. But nowadays, you know, that's not really happening. That's not true. You got these brothers, Radkey. They're alive and well. And you know what? They actually, and along with this band, the Black Tones, which brings us right back here to Seattle. Come on. There we go. Some of Seattle's finest. Let's stop share. So bands like Radkey, bands like Black Tones now really are the ones who are populating what has become a huge megalithic concert fest called Afropunk. Afropunk, the concert series, is born out of a documentary put together by James Spooner back in 2003. And it's interesting to see how it has already morphed into something so different. It makes us kind of wonder, how is it connected to the original punk rock ethos? There's just been so much of a shift. But at the end of the day, it does my heart so good to see that it is alive and well. And for me, a way in which Black folks in this country and others can continue, without even knowing it, to tap into that African spiritual musical practice through innovative music art forms born right here. I ran long. I tried to move fast. My apologies. Sort of, kind of. I'm wide open.
You're all good.
Questions.
I was wondering, I know we're recording this, but is there any way we can have access to the PowerPoint or the Prezi?
You want
There were some of the artists I was like, oh, I'm trying to listen to that.
I tell you what, I'll figure out. I don't know, Prezi's kind of freaking me out, but I'll try to figure out how I can share it with you all, or at least make it public so it's accessible, and kind of go through it. Yeah, I'll look into it.
Or even a list of just the artists that were mentioned.
I could do that also. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, and we can send that out to everybody as well if he send it to us.
Sounds good.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Thoughts, comments, concerns, criticisms, revisions? What you got for me? Y'all quiet.
Well, I mean, no, that means it was good. There was no
Word.
I mean, it is 2:00. Our classes are trying to run an hour long,
right?
And we do want to respect everybody's time.
So
thank you, Jabali. If you need to go, you can go. I'm just gonna get closing statements real quick. But again, this was an event put on by Eastside Change Coalition called the DECOLONIZED CLASSROOM. We have another class, our final one of the series for August is this Sunday at 1 p.m. One of my good friends, Matab, she's leading a class on abolitionist teaching. She's a great teacher. I've shared educational experiences with her. I would highly recommend it. We also, again, this is something that will continue hopefully in September, towards the end of September. So just watch out on our Instagram for updates on that. But besides that, can we give one last round of applause for Jabali? Virtual round of applause. Thank you. You did great.
Thank you.
I think Josie had a question.
Yeah, okay, so like that was amazing. Thank you. I'm still like mind blown. But so what were like your sources? Like where did you get all this information basically? Or like what are like books or like things that yeah, like resources that are we should check out?
Yeah, that's good. Oh man, what's his name? So most of this is because I got a doctorate degree in ethnomusicology, and so for once I knew how I wanted to do it, I was just picking up stuff all over the place, you know. And to be real, um, my family's connected to the Orisha family down in Trinidad, and so that's how I started to learn about the different countries and in their origins and connections to the source code. Um, but the music stuff is, oh God, Candia Crazy Horse. She's an author, black woman, total amazing black rocker, and she's got a couple of books that are incredibly helpful. Um, and then he wrote The Fly in the Buttermilk. I don't know why I'm spacing on his name, but Fly in the Buttermilk um, can help a lot also. Uh, Other than that, really, I mean, like there's so much material, but other than that, really, it's kind of me. Yeah, finding little because a lot of this there's no volume. A lot of this is like finding a little source and like, oh, look, that connects over here, and then drawing a line, and then once you start drawing the line and there are questions that emerge, then you follow that rabbit hole and see where it goes and see how does it connect to that original piece, super fun.
Beautiful. Also, your
Oh,
wife is dope. I know who that is.
What's that?
I know your wife is Monica Rojas, right?
Oh yeah,
She's
totally.
really dope. Yeah. Anyway, she's really cool too.
Wow. I will pass that along. I agree. That's amazing.
hi, I'm Liam. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Eastside Change Coalition. I just wanted to say I thought it was really dope learning about how punk rock now in America, like Jimi Hendrix, all those artists are connected to the Yoruban culture and religion and people. Because I was actually studying the whole philosophical concept of Ashe or Ase from the Yoruban people, and I just think it's cool that that's all connected because I thought we were so distant from that, but it's right here for us as a
It's
people.
it is right here and in full swing and operation on the daily. We
Yeah,
just A lot of it is that we just don't know. A lot of folks just don't know. They're participating in, and these things have been handed down quietly, like
yeah,
in the United States, because of
hmm
the nature of this society.
yeah,
So yeah, Ashe is a powerful thing. In the
hmm
Congo cosmology, we call it Intu. So
into,
Intu and Ashe are kind of similar spiritual forces, but Mojo is that personal activated force, and that's, man. How many people? Everybody knows what. Oh yeah, my mojo's a little low today. People have been saying that for decades,
yeah,
not knowing where it's coming from. You know,
yeah. I
it's
think it's cool that like we can learn about because a lot of our culture was lost through slavery and through our ancestry at all across the African diaspora. I just think it's cool that through this movement we can learn from people like you who you do know that tradition, you do know that culture because as you said it was passed down quietly and we can reconnect with that. So I
exactly.
just think that's dope.
That's the. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for teaching me today and
Yeah,
everybody else.
my pleasure. Totally my
Yeah.
pleasure. Yeah. Anything else?
Oh, hi. I had a quick quick question.
Yeah.
Or I guess I was curious, you said your father was from Trinidad, and I was wondering when you were doing music when you were younger, were you kind of aware of that decolonized history? Yeah, okay.
It,
That's super interesting.
that was our house.
Yeah.
There were
hmm
we. My father I didn't because I knew time was a thing. My father was an anthropologist, also Black Studies. My father had a hand in setting up the Black Studies department at UCLA, and had a hand in hiring Angela Davis into one of the first positions there. So our house was, again, multi-pronged Blackness all the time. And we were not allowed to pretend that we didn't have that source code. That was not an option. And anytime, like my father always used to talk about how there's patchwork history, especially here in the U.S., because there's this process, right? Like there's a creation occurs in Black community, white community appropriates it, Black community creates something new, and then literally walks away from and leaves that which was created, which then creates this very patchwork holy history. It's like we don't do that anymore, and then over time they stop identifying with it, right? Which means then you're walking away from your history. So in our house it was like, no, you did that too, and we did that, and we did that, and we did that, because if you don't know where you come from, man, it's just not a good thing, so it was all day every day. It still is all day every day. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for teaching from that background and knowledge.
Absolutely. Total pleasure.
I have a question.
Hmm?
I was really interested about the synchronization pattern.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if in a very strange hypothetical world where the colonizers were like, okay, you can practice your religion and music and spirituality freely, do you think that the music that would arise from that would be as rich if it didn't have that pressure of having to kind of be all sneaky and fit inside?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's a really good question. My instincts and my guts, because it's hard to say, right? But my instincts and my guts say no, it wouldn't quite be the same, right? There's something really powerful about forbidden fruit. I know for a fact things would have developed differently if there had been more obvious exchange, right? But because that wasn't the case, and all of this stuff is kind of being cooked in this crucible over here clandestinely, folks outside of that crucible are looking at that crucible going, oh, that's pretty dang cool. Like, you tell a kid they can't have a cookie from the cookie jar, all of a sudden that's gold, right? And that, I think that process was fully at play and caused a I don't want to say fetishization, but it's like oh, you guys do that really cool thing over there, and we want some of that because we really don't do that. We're so distant and separate, and the only way that we can kind of find this other cool new thing is by dipping our toe into that crucible, but just a little bit, So that's my gut. That's a great question. It's a great question.
That was really interesting. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to hop on. I actually studied music at the University of Washington, and I took some ethnomusicology classes with Christina Sunardi.
Oh, yeah.
And I just really enjoyed your presentation because it went deeper in different areas and connected different ways, and
Nice.
it was great.
Nice, very good. I used to teach the American Popular Music course at UW,
Nice.
and it was always one of my joys to teach that class because I could thread a lot of this stuff into the content, in a way that I could kind of bring a little decolonization into this prefab structure. But my favorite lecture by far was the lecture about punk rock, because we'd be sitting in this big old lecture halls, and I would just get everybody to scream at the same time. And I was like, yes,
That's awesome.
It's so fun. That's good, Kristen. She's amazing.
She is. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last minutes? All right then. I'm gonna peace out. Y'all
Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
coming.
Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely. Please.
Another round of applause.